Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 211 of Dial the Gate. My name is David Reed. Thank you so much for joining me for the Stargate Oral History Project. We've got Rob Fournier back for another episode to discuss more behind the scenes of his side of things as an armorer and military advisor on Stargate SG-1, Stargate Atlantis, and Stargate Universe. But before we bring him in, if you enjoy Stargate and you want to see more content like this on YouTube, please click that like button. It makes a difference with YouTube and will continue to help the show grow its audience. Please also consider sharing this video with a Stargate friend. And if you want to get notified about future episodes, click subscribe. And if you click the bell icon, we will notify you the moment a new video drops, and you'll get my notifications of any last minute guest changes. And clips from this live stream will be released over the course of the next few weeks on both the Dial the Gate and GateWorld.net YouTube channels. As this is a live show, we've got, I believe, Tracy and Anthony in the and Jeremy in the chat right now to help us with any questions that you might have for Rob. So if you want to get those over to them while we're talking, we can then get those over to Rob and have those questions answered for you. Rob Fournier, armorer on Stargate SG-1, Atlantis and Universe, and many other things that you've seen, and I hope to get to a couple of them in this episode. My friend, welcome back to the show. Thank you for being back with us.
Thank you, David. I just want to start by saying it's an honor and a pleasure to be back on your show.
Oh, well, that means a lot. Your side of things are, you have so many good stories, and it's I've been apologizing to a lot of people lately now that I'm in the 200s with this show. It's like I should have had them on years ago, but you know, you move through the content as best you can and reach out to people who you can, and you find diamonds along the way. And I've got a shining one with you, so I really appreciate having you back.
Well, there are a lot of people that were on that show in all those years.
It's a wild operation that they had going on to be able to do 17 seasons of television. And the fact of the matter was, and I've mentioned this before, in 3 years' time, they did 120 hours. That is insane by by any standards. And they're crazy.
Nuts. It's just like a blur. And then there's little bits of memories in between all that. But some of the best memories are the ones that you remember fondly, right?
How early on would you get a call in the production cycle? I know that for the production managers, they would have like 5 weeks lead time to start developing sets and things like that. When would you keep your calendar open for Stargate? How did Stargate Productions and you interface?
Well, the more that I got involved in Stargate, especially after doing the pilot of SG-1, I noticed I was getting more and more involved, and then I got to know the cast better. They started to trust me, and then especially with Richard Dean Anderson, he said, "You know what? Let's have you on a little bit more." And he had so much influence.
He's producer,
being the lead producer,
executive producer, yeah.
And you know, they all talk, and they go up in their nice offices up there in the old MGM studios at Vancouver Film Studios, or sorry, the Bridge Studio, and they started talking. The next thing you know, I'd get a phone call, and it was from Rick himself.
Oh,
he was living down in Kitsilano, right down by the beach, and he says, "Rob," and I says, "Yeah, this is Rob. Who's this?" "Oh, it's Rick." I'm like, and I didn't quite recognize the voice, and he goes, "It's RDA," and I went, "Oh, okay, Rick, how you doing?" Stuff like that. He says, "Well, you know, we want to get you more involved. We want to bring you at the production level.
When would this have been?
This would have been about, I would say about maybe a third of the way through season 1.
Okay, so early on, so 97. Okay.
Yeah, it started getting more and more. They found out I was ex-military and I was current. I had lots of friends in the military, especially in the U.S. Armed Forces, that were still current if I needed to do research on certain things. My brother-in-law was a retired colonel in the U.S. Air Force, lives down in San Diego right now.
Wow.
But you know, it became more of a trust thing, because the producers always, when they don't know you, they don't say a whole lot. They want to know what you know, and then they want to see how they can apply it to scripts and how they can, you know, influence more with the actors, because you got to be careful when you talk about certain subjects of a script, because you don't want to hurt the writer's feelings.
Of course
At the
not.
same time, you want to be technically correct, right? So you have to have that fine line, that sort of medium ground where you say, well, that's great, but this is what would improve it and make it sound better and make it look better. He said, and I got to know the writers quite well because they were also producers on the show.
Mhm.
And the more influence I had, I found myself getting called more and more. And Stargate wasn't the only show in town. I was
Right.
doing other productions at the same time. And all of a sudden, I'm getting more calls and more calls. And the shop I work out of here in Vancouver, they were kind of getting sick of taking all my calls. So then I started giving my personal number
Yeah.
to the producers, the production manager, the two of the prop masters who are still very good friends of mine today, Kenny Gibbs, Dean Goodine. They are just fabulous people. I still work for them today, and we still have a great relationship. And that was built right from the old Stargate days.
When you have people that you can trust to get the job done, there's no reason to go and start from scratch if those people are available, especially when you need technical competence for something that is legitimately one of the most dangerous things that you can be doing in this industry. You know, even if you're firing off blanks, you know, you have to have people behind you that you can trust and will have your back and will not blame someone else if something goes wrong.
That's correct. Like, safety was always number one. And when I started training the cast, we did a lot of dry training at the first with all the firearms that we used. P90 wasn't in yet. It was all MP5s and M4s, CAR 15s, your basic assault rifles. And it was very slow to begin with. But then as the actors got more confident, still being extremely safe,
Mm-hmm.
then we applied it on productions, and then all of a sudden I would start training stunt performers, and I would start training the background, and then I would help coordinate with the stunt coordinator Dan Shea. We would coordinate these whole battle sequences, and I would place people. There's always two things you got to remember when you're dealing with blanks. Obviously, it's the danger of the blank itself, especially at close range. You always have to worry about where you're aiming at and where the empty casings eject. And the empty casings are hot, sharp. They don't want them going in somebody's face or down their shirt. So Dan would place his stunt performers or background performers in conjunction with the cast in a big battle sequence, because we did a few on Stargate. And I would adjust them so they wouldn't get hit with brass, and they would actually have a safe lane to shoot in.
Yeah, they're
And
not
they
wearing
would
eye protection.
they're not wearing eye protection, and the ear protection. This is the funny thing. So with ear protection, you have those little foamy ones, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you skin tone them because makeup does a great job to skin tone them. But sometimes they'd stick out a little bit, so they would cut them in half. So now you're losing the decibel rating
Yep.
of your earplugs, right? So
Yep.
I ended up ordering some special earplugs that had a great decibel rating, which were smaller. And then the makeup department fell in love with it because they were easier to skin tone with all their makeup kits, especially with different skin tones of our cast and background and stuff. And we just stuck with that. And I swear that company made a killing on that show because we fired a lot of blanks, right? So
It's not something that you think about unless you're in that field where it's like every time that you see the weapons going off, their ears are plugged, you know, or at
they're
least they're
plugged.
supposed to be, unless you know
Yeah.
you're a certain actor. That one time that we mentioned, and your ears go ringing because it hurts. I've fired off a weapon without covering my ears, and it's like lesson learned. Not going to do that again. And
Yeah, absolutely.
but I imagine afterwards if they say cut or something, it's like, what? I can't hear. I imagine if you're going to give notes to your actors, it's either a lot of taking them in and out, or you have to find some other way. It's a lot of lip reading. One more take or some. How do you pull that off?
Well, you always had two types of actors on Stargate, and that's all three productions, right? You would have the ones that would try and be Mr. Tough Guy and said, no, I don't need him. We're outside. The sound's going to dissipate. I said, look, If you see
Hurts.
me wearing eye protection, I says, I highly recommend it. You can't push them on the ground and force it in their ear. It's their decision whether they want to wear it or not. But I usually say, you're going to want them on the second take.
Yeah.
And sure enough, they want them on the second take. A smarter, more seasoned actor that's dealt with firearms and explosions and action at a high level will say, yes, Rob, I want earplugs, even if they're a quarter load. That's their livelihood. If they can't hear, then they can't produce the dialogue. So a lot of times what we did is I was very close with the sound department too, because they're super hypersensitive, especially the boom operator and the sound mixer. And I would tell them, I said, they'd always ask, what type of loads are we using? I says, we got 1,200 rounds, quarter loads in this scene, still loud. Just be careful on your board. There's no dialogue. If you want, we can just go MOS on it, mit out sound on it. And MOS just means that they're not recording sound, and then they'll dub in the firearm effect later, like the sound of a firearm. And because you don't want to destroy their livelihood, they have to be able to hear in order to have a job. So I was always very close with the sound department. I would always find the boom operator, and he would drop the boom to my face, and I'd say, whoever our sound mixer was, I would say, okay, yeah, we got 800 rounds full load on this. And then the boom op would just say, yeah, he says, thanks, Rob, much appreciated. Because if you don't communicate with that, you can ruin that person's livelihood, right? Communication is always the key. And a lot of times what I was taught in the military, you repeat everything twice, because there's always somebody that's going to miss it, whether they're on a different channel, especially in the immediate vicinity of a gunfire sequence. If they're back at the work trucks half a kilometer away, it's not a big deal. But if they're immediately near the set, everybody needs to be aware. And we always had great first ADs. They picked the absolute best first ADs when we did that series, right? And I think the whole AD department was great, right down to the training assistant directors. They were all fantastic. But they would always allow me to have a safety meeting on set. And I would do it just before the gunfire. I would do it in the morning, very briefly, and then I would do it just before gunfire. And I would relay, I said, look, and I'm not shy to talk to 150, 200 people. I'm not shy. I'll get up on a table and with a loudspeaker, and I'll relay all the information. I says, look, we're firing 2,000 rounds in this scene. They are full loads. Everybody should have ear protection. If there's not enough ear protection, use your fingers, put them in your ears. When they yell cut, you can let them out. It's the cheapest form of ear protection right there.
And it works.
And it works, but not everybody can do that, especially a camera operator.
That's true.
Dolly grip.
That's true.
So they have to have special ear protection. And through the years on Stargate, because I was such good friends with the props department, props is who handles ear and eye protection. I would say, look, I says, these ear protectors are okay, but there's better ones out there, and they're going to last longer. And the camera department's going to thank you for them. And not just the camera department, any department that's around there. I've had ADs wear ear protection in between shots too, right? So they were thankful of it. You spend the money, you get a quality product, right? It's like, you want a fast car, you're going to have to spend the money.
That's the thing.
You want a slower car, it's, quality costs money, right?
Absolutely. I want to jump into a couple of the fan questions really quickly here, because I think they're relevant. Dan Ben wants to know, can you explain wearing protective goggles when firing certain weapons? I remember the SG-1 team put them on a few times. Why not more, or did the show not want them in use? And there's one specific instance that's one of my favorite sequences in the show that I'm going to bring up after this. But was it just an aesthetic thing, or, why weren't goggles always used so they could get in as tight as they wanted? Or I'm curious.
A lot of times the goggles, whether they're scripted in the sequence, if they're scripted in the scene that they're wearing goggles, then they're wearing goggles.
Okay.
Other times they would be because there's so much debris flying in the air, whether it's explosions from Staff Blast or the Jaffa aircraft with the explosions on the ground. They preferred to wear the ear protection. Now, the detriment on eye protection was they would fog up. And when they fog up, they can't see anything, right? So they tried, let's cut holes in it, and let's do this, and let's do that.
Okay.
And it was just a little nightmare for the props department. They would have to get lens anti-fog stuff. They would have to get the ones with the little fans in it, and then you have a battery system. So there was all these different degrees of stuff. And then sometimes the cast, all four of the leads would come up to me and said, Rob, would we wear goggles in this scene? And I'm like, as a soldier, I wouldn't. I said, I don't need it because I lose my peripheral vision and I can't see the enemy when I'm wearing goggles. Yes, it protects your eyes. That's if you're in a very windy or dusty or sandy environment. But if you're in a nice, calm environment, not expecting a combat situation, you don't need to wear goggles. Or the goggles are up on their helmet, which
Right.
we've seen many, many times, right? And they like to cover them with this it's kind of like a nylon piece. It helps protect the lens of the goggle, but it also stops reflecting the camera into their lens, right? So it's like the land speeder thing in Star Wars where you see the camera as the land speeder goes by. They fixed that with CGI, but I'm just back then we would just cover it up and make it quite simple. I said, you don't have to put this stuff and some spray on stuff to keep it from reflecting. Just put a cover on it. And then when you apply your goggles, you just slip it off. It goes on the back of the helmet. The goggles come down.
And you're
And
done.
yeah, if you saw a lot of times when SG-1 was traveling, when they go through the Stargate and onto another planet, 90% of the time they had the goggles up top here. They were ready for any situation. And we've done situations where all of a sudden goggles come down and they're engaging the enemy, right? So there is a million scenarios with that. I hope that answered his
I
question.
think so. The one of the aesthetics of the early end of SG-1 was matching the film, and pretty much everyone who went through, except for Kurt on the original Abydos mission, had a set of goggles and a helmet, and those with SG-1 really went away the longer the show went on. I'm guessing that's just an aesthetic change. We saw them in Camouflage Make-Up once in an episode called Rules of Engagement. Were you involved in that one?
Yes, I have a picture, I think, from the
I
last
think
interview,
so. That's right.
and that
Sorry.
was Richard with the fully camouflage, and I was there in makeup because they tried their pattern as a test pattern on somebody. And I'm like, no. I said that looks like something out of Cirque du Soleil. I said we need proper camouflage, and then that's where I went in and helped. I was right in the cast trailers or in the makeup trailer with the cast, and I was like, you need more dark here. The high features, the ear, the nose, the chin, the forehead have to be with darker and stuff like that. And that's how I was taught in the military because it's all about blending in with your environment, especially if it's a bright moonlit night or a daytime shot, right? So it technically I was very strict with that, and sometimes the cast would be like, oh geez, and I'm like, well, I said, do you want to be a B series or do you want to be an A series? I said, I'm making you look great.
Yeah,
I don't
you've
want to make
hired
you
me.
look
I'm right
good.
here. Yeah,
Yeah. So
exactly.
sometimes we get in these little tiffs and little arguments because they didn't have their morning coffee or something. And I'm like, just suck it up. Let's go. I says, you're on a great series. We're
Yeah.
having fun. And we're making history. So let's carry on and get those chevrons engaged.
The episode that I was referring to a minute ago with uh, the one of the few times that SG-1 wore glasses, there were Atlantis and Universe is a different story. There was the opening to season 5. It was called Enemies, and it was a lot of close quarters gunfire in the Gould set as replicators were running at them. Martin
Mm.
Wood did this episode. It's a running and gunning down a corridor trying to get to a ring room, and
Mhm.
it's hands free, and nothing had ever been seen like that on the show before, where you've got these mechanical bugs that are going to be rendered in CGI later, and you've got each of the principal cast except for Christopher Judge in formation going down this hall. Were you there for this? Do you remember this
Yeah,
sequence?
I do. And I think the weapon we used, we call it the stupid gun. And I'll explain what the stupid gun was.
Okay.
It's a USAS 12, so it's a select fire 12 gauge with a 19 round drum.
These were
And
P90s.
Okay, with the P90s. I know we did another episode with
Okay.
the replicators and that. Well, the P90s, what happened is there's still a lot of concussive effect on it, and they're firing P90s all over the place with these 50 round magazines. And Martin is trying to explain they're going to come from this side, they're going to come here, they're going to come up the wall and come down, and they're all going to be coming at you very quickly. And I think Amanda or Chris says, "Well, where do we shoot?" And Martin just said, "Shoot everywhere."
Yeah, yeah.
You know, and
It was Amanda,
obviously,
Michael, and Rick in this
uh,
sequence.
right. And I remember because I was helping with the camera. The camera was it wasn't on a dolly because otherwise you'd see the dolly. It was on a steady cam, and I think Nathaniel was our camera operator. They didn't know how to protect him. And because of the gunfire, I says, "Look, I know how to do this. Give me a handheld shield." I said, "Nathaniel and I are going to wear some Kevlar vest in case we come outside the shield. We're going to wear full face shields, ear protection." We had earplugs and ear protection because I had all those P90s shooting in our general direction towards us as we're coming up towards the cast. And I just remember after the first take, Nathaniel put the Steadicam on its stand, and he kind of leaned over the garbage can, and I'm like, "Are you okay?" He says, "I just might throw up here." But he was fine. It was because of the concussive effect, right?
Yeah.
I don't think he was realizing, and I'm warning them. I said, "Look, there's going to be a lot of pressure here.
You're in a
I'm
closed
used to
space. You're in a
very
set.
close space, right in the set. The walls, the sound is just coming right at us. All the concussive effect, all the shock waves are coming towards us. So I don't think I was used to it being ex-military. I'm like, okay, I've done this a million times, and I did warn Nathaniel. And then he had a dolly grip behind him too, right? Because I'm holding the shield in front of him while the dolly grip is guiding him in so he doesn't tip over with the very expensive Steadicam. So there's three of us moving in towards the cast. And I had two extra armors with me that day to help reload magazines and stuff like that. But I do remember that sequence very well. And we ended up doing, I think, 4 takes or 5 takes. Then we went in for coverage, and then we had to do the reverse of it. Reverse was much easier because camera didn't need protection.
Yeah.
We're behind the brass of the P90 ejects straight down. Nobody's in any danger whatsoever. I had lockups on the very end of the sets to make sure nobody wandered in, what we call a bogey, right? That's somebody that just wanders into set accidentally. So I had all the angles checked, and I always had constant communication with the first AD. That is the lifeline of any production.
Wow. There's so much that's involved in going. You, it's so easy to forget the number of people who are standing there behind the camera,
Lots.
or on that side of production, and you have to keep an eye on all of them when this metal is just, at least with the P90s, most of them go down, but I mean, it's like this is a random situation, especially that I'll never forget that sequence. That was an extraordinary scene. They really upped the game because I think that was one of the first times that a Steadicam was used in that regard, shooting against CG enemies, numerous enemies that were just coming at them, and just assume that they're everywhere and just keep on going backwards. So it was wild, absolutely amazing sequence. I've got yeah.
It brings back a number of memory because that was Martin Wood, correct?
Yep.
There was another episode I did with Martin Wood, and we were inside a Russian submarine. Do you
Yep.
remember that episode?
Yep. That was Small Victories, season 4.
Small Victories, and we're shooting replicators inside there. And I think it was Chris Judge, and he had the full auto shotgun, the USAS 12, the stupid gun. I named it because the concussive effect is just stupid. It's a massive fireball, and it's a big boom. It's actually louder than a live round going off. So they built this cutaway version of a submarine. We had a half version of it inside one of the stages. And Martin wanted to do this very unique shot. And I hope this didn't sidetrack you too much. But he
No,
wanted
please.
to do this amazing shot. He says, "Look, I want to look over the gun. I want to shoot in every direction on this submarine. Obviously not inside the stage, but seeing 180 degrees." And he had this little camera that he's holding, and the gun is here, and I'm wrapped around him. My body is right up against his back, and I'm wrapped around. I'm basically spooning him, and I'm wrapped around him with the shotgun. And everything ejects to the right on the USAS 12. It has a 19 round drum. And he says, and we rehearsed it, him and I said, where do you want me to shoot? He goes, everywhere and everything, because the replicators are going to be on like,
they're coming.
And we had light bulbs in the set because it's a red light, right?
Uh-huh.
And then Martin whispers in my ear just before I'm about to go hot with the shotgun. He goes, make sure you hit the light bulbs. I'm like, oh, great. Now the lighting department's going to hate my guts because I'm going to shatter their lights. And sure enough, there's 2 light bulbs that are in my vicinity. And I save the last few rounds and I go boom, boom. And the light bulbs shatter. And the sound guys, of course, they got to kill the breaker on it. They got to disconnect the lights. Well, there's no bulbs, so they have to unscrew it. Weird manner. Well, we did that probably 7 times.
Wow.
And it
so
was
you
at
had
a
live rounds?
Blanks. I had blanks, obviously, but
so how do you shoot the bulbs out? Oh,
the concussion was so great. I was only about a foot away from these light bulbs, and the power behind these 12 gauge blanks is incredible. Like at close range, you could blow through cardboard like it's nothing.
Wow,
and
the concussive force is that strong.
It was. I was shooting up everything, and at the end of each take, Martin and I was just sweating. It was like a workout itself. And I said, Martin, I said, I've never done anything like this. This is a very unique shot. Since then, I've done very similar things, but that was kind of a first for me. Wow. And we rehearsed the heck out of it because I wanted to make sure that myself and Martin were safe, obviously. Brass is ejecting. No one's near the set. The camera is right in his chest, and he's in tight like this. He's got a full face shield. I have a full face shield because of the stuff shattering, especially the light bulbs. And we did that over and over and over. And then on the last take, he goes, and he's breathing heavy. He goes, I think we got that. says, thanks. I said, I don't know if I could do an 8th take on that. I was just like breathing heavy, and I was in shape back then, much better than I am now. But it was a lot of fun. I've always loved working with Martin. I always had some great episodes with him, and he's given me some acting roles in the past too, right? He's thrown these nice little parts my way and stuff, and I'm ever grateful to him. I'll go that extra mile for him any day.
So I've got a couple examples of those actually. I have an image here from season 5's Ascension with you, Rick, Amanda, and John Delancey, and you're a part of Colonel Simmons' unit in this night shoot. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Can you show me that image?
I'll
probably remember it.
This is one of the ones that you sent to me. You're handing Amanda some an earpiece so that she can communicate in the house.
Oh, yes. Yeah. So that earpiece is a receiver transmitter. Okay. So instead of wearing throat mics or an earpiece that comes down with a microphone, it's a receiver transmitter, and they had to be molded for each cast member's ear.
Okay.
Well, we didn't really need it, but it played in the scene.
Yes.
Like as if somebody is communicating, they could be separated. And it also acted as ear protection for them. Yes. Right. So it was dual purpose. I remember that sequence because props had them specially made and specially molded. I think we had like 4 pairs for each cast member in case they lost them. And we did lose some because it was nighttime. And I think we were in not a sandy environment.
It's a residential area. Yeah.
Yeah. It was definitely dark, and sometimes they'd pop out and they would lose them, and then they'd find them later on. But it's like, you can't waste time. If you lose one, boom, you got another one right away. There's you don't want 100 people with flashlights looking for a lost earpiece at 2 a.m. in a residential, right? So.
The other one, I have a couple of. You sent me one screenshot, and I went and found the full res versions. And one of you taking a squib to the chest. You are in camo gear coming out of the back of a puddle jumper at the end of Mobius Part 2 in the alternate reality. You're playing another Mansfield from SG-1, and the Jaffa are coming at you guys, and you guys are trying to retreat, and you've got staff blasts coming at you.
I remember that because Dan Shea, I thank Dan Shea for that. He gave me that role.
Ah,
And I was also technical advisor that day. So in between shots, I'm setting up the cast, what they'd be doing. And then I had to hit my first mark and then remember what my job was. But at the same time, it was okay, well, I get killed. And Dan Shea goes, "You're kind of like that guy on Star Trek in the
the
early
red
seasons,
shirts.
the red shirt." Says we should have just given you a red shirt, and you're the token, um, person that gets taken out right away and stuff like that. Because I did get a few rounds off, and then I get killed, and then there was, I think, a background performer behind me that
Yes.
ends up rushing into the ship, and they leave the dead guy behind. So they got to get out of there. So I was highly expendable, but that's the joy of doing stunt work. So
Expendable on camera, not
on
behind the
camera,
scenes.
that's
What
correct.
goes into the process of suiting up for a squib, and what does that impact feel like? I'm assuming that there are people standing by with fire extinguishers. What's that process like?
Squibbing obviously is through the special effects department,
Yeah.
which were all very good friends of mine. I was squibbed quite a bit, not just in that sequence, but I also played like a German terrorist
Okay.
uh, in an old house, and I was firing an Uzi on a rooftop, and then
Oh, this is the gamekeeper.
that's right.
Yeah,
Yeah,
East
we were in
Germany,
a
season
very old
2.
home. That's about an hour outside of Vancouver in a very old farm. That's a heritage home actually, and it's covered in all
Yep.
green and it has overgrowth on it and all that. So I had to focus as being a stunt performer on there. So I brought in two of my armors to cover my position. I was still a technical advisor, but when I was for that stunt, it was actually Rick that shot me,
Mm-hmm.
and it wasn't with a P90. I think he was using it was either an M16A2 or an M4, and he empties a whole mag into me. And I'm on a rooftop, and I had 7 squibs in my chest, and then special effects is also shooting what they call dust hits and zerks. We didn't use zerks because it's only good on metal. It doesn't make sense to spark on wood. So they use dust hits. Well, they're not the most accurate things. So I had like 3 or 4 hit me in the leg. I really didn't need to act so much. I went down like a bag of hammers, and then I roll off the roof onto a pad, which was about 7 feet below the rooftop. And so the whole process of going through the squib, these were very big squibs with blood packs, and they were front and back, so it was entry exit. And so it takes about probably about 20 to 30 minutes per person to rig a person properly so the squibs go off. And I was what they call a self detonate. So I had
Okay.
a battery pack, and I actually had the button underneath my left thumb as it's on the forestock of the Uzi. You don't see it because I covered it with my thumb. And at the right time, I have to pretend I'm going to do a mag change because I empty out the Uzi, and I'm super exposed. In the reverse, Rick fires a whole mag off in burst. He just empties it up. He's like, I'm gonna let Fournier get it. And so then that's when I hit the squibs. And then I basically dropped to my knees after I got hit by a couple dust hits, which actually broke the skin on my legs. But
Oh,
it's par for the course, and it was
yeah.
a ton of fun. And they did apologize with a grin later on. Special
What a
effects
bottle of
department.
wine.
Well, they ended up, yeah, they took me out for beers that
Okay, there
night
you go.
after wrap. But no, it was a lot of fun. Getting squibbed, if it also, because it's basically a mini explosion on you.
Yeah.
So you have to be protected from the rear end and from behind the squib, because a squib, when it expands in all directions. So you have to protect your skin. So what we'd use is like a thick neoprene underneath, or sometimes we go as much as an aluminum plate
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of shaped to your torso. And we put that underneath, and then we wrap it with tape. So I had quite a few squibs. So I had this like a very thin aluminum sheet, and then some neoprene over it, and then the squibs on top, and then the shirt that went over top that. And then they had little markers to see where the squibs were. And just before we went to camera, they take the little pieces of tape off because you don't want to see that on camera. But I also had to open myself up so when the squibs went off, they didn't hit towards my forearms or my
Yeah.
hand, because they do hurt. So when I did the mag change, I made sure that my arms were away, but I didn't want to make it look like I was too open. So I basically pull the magazine out of the back, the bottom of the full Uzi. And as I'm doing so, that's when I hit the squibs. And then the chest just explodes. I drop down on both knees. I didn't do the old 80-foot shot in the back, because that's not what happens when you get shot. I wanted to make it as accurate as possible for production quality. And then I basically rolled onto a pad that Dan Shea and other stunt people had. They also have safety down there in case you roll the wrong way,
Right.
and they can actually pull another pad and at least stop you from hitting the ground 7 feet below the actual rooftop. So there's a lot of hands that are involved, a lot of people involved, but it's all about safety. And whether it's firearms, explosions, stunts, it's always got to be at that high level, right?
You've got to have plans for things to go wrong. You have to be prepared for something to happen. And I'm sure, every once in a while, probably someone was sent to the emergency room over something. It's a part of doing things so dangerous. And it's why you have professionals in there to handle the situation for when something goes awry. So you can plan as much as you can, but eventually something wonky is going to happen.
That's
So,
right. I've had injuries in the past, and I've had some minor fractures, and I've had I've been cut. I've been going through plate glass windows. It doesn't matter if it's tempered or candy glass. You're eventually going to get cut. So yeah, I've had stitches before and stuff like that, and that's why stunt performers earn their keep, because there's that high risk level, right? And they earn every cent that they work on.
heroes. I have a photo of you, Adam Baldwin, and is it Ryan Steesey?
Yeah, Ryan is he the last movie he worked with me on, because he's a sharpshooter, and he
Wow.
works for a company that builds sniper rifles. So he's basically has a new career, but his last movie with me was when I did Deadpool 2 with him. He was my second in command. But Ryan was always very, very reliable with me, and I'd always bring him in all these shows. Great personality, knows firearms. I don't have to tell him anything. We're always thinking on the same level. And that whole sequence with Adam Baldwin, because I'm a massive Stanley Kubrick fan, and I was a fan of Full Metal Jacket. Now, in this, Adam Baldwin plays Colonel Dixon.
He
I'm
does.
right,
Colonel
and
Dave Dixon.
he did two episodes kind of back to back, so we had him for quite a few days, and I got to know him well, and he knew that I was a big fan of Full Metal Jacket, and his character actually, I have to correct myself. It's not an M16; it was an M4, and I connected a grenade launcher, an M203 40 millimeter grenade launcher underneath. He wanted to stand out, being a commander of his unit with a different weapon and with a little bit more firepower. But we also had the M60A1, which is a weapon that Adam carried in Full Metal
Is
Jacket.
that what this picture is?
That's right.
Okay.
They called him Animal or Mother, right? He had these nicknames in it, but he fires that thing like crazy. And I remember they did that whole sequence in Pinewood Studios in London. And I had one of the stunt guys that carried that and fired that in that big battle sequence we had with the Jaffa. And I think that day I had like 6 armors with me. It was just a full on day. And I said, Adam, I said, well, first of all, I went to the stunt performer. We were in between scenes. They were doing some camera adjustments. And I knew the stunt performer. I says, I need to borrow the M60 for a sec. He goes, okay. Are you bringing it back? I said, don't worry. You'll get it back. I'm not taking it away from you. I just need it for a couple of minutes. And I went up to Adam and I showed him, I said, Adam, check it out. And he goes, oh, old faithful. So I said, it would be a pleasure and an honor if I could get a photo of you carrying this thing. He says, and we were just going to get a photo of him with that M60. And he says, no, you guys got to get in here. So, okay. And of course we got in there, and that was a really hot day, and everybody is sweating like crazy and stuff like that. And we snapped that photo, and it was great. It was a fun day. he's a really gifted actor, and he's got a unique look, and he really brought out
Mhm.
his character so well. I wish he would have done more episodes.
He's back in several of the novels.
Yeah.
He resonated that much with the fan base that Colonel Dixon's all over the books in many respects. So yeah, that's it's Heroes was a huge shoot. Andy McKee, I believe, directed that one, and he said that for a lot of those element. Let me restart. He said that a lot of that episode was shot over a couple 3 months, where it was like, okay, we're going to get this shot here, we're going to get this shot there, because it was being extended to 2 hours when it was originally one. That master of the boot going into the puddle, and then it pulls back and pans across the field, and you've got Alkesh flying over and plasma bombs, and the SG units just trying to avoid this strafe. It's one of the coolest shots of the show.
That was and I remember that because they had 6 or 7 cameras that day. But that shot you're talking about is a really long dolly track shot.
Mm-hmm.
And it starts with a boot and then it widens out and stuff like that. I think the dolly itself was like 120 yards long. It was
It kept
crazy
going.
how it just kept going forever and ever. And they had 2 dolly grips on the dolly because they had to hit the brakes with the thing. As we know, dollies are not light and they're heavy. And when you get them on those silky smooth tracks, they don't stop on a dime. And you don't
Right.
want to see that jerking effect of the camera, right?
Right.
So
It's not supposed to
yeah,
be there. Yeah.
and we had all sections there. We had like, because I had 6 armors, we had Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta, Echo, Foxtrot section. So I was with Alpha unit, which was always our cast. I was always attached to the cast. Like that was my
Mm-hmm.
forte. And I would say Bravo, Charlie, or I would say Bravo, Charlie, Delta, Echo, Foxtrot, sound in, go hot. And they'd go, Bravo's hot, Charlie's hot, Echo's hot, Foxtrot's hot. And I would look at the director, and the first AD says, all guns are hot, good to go. And they say, okay, all guns are hot, and roll sound. So basically, that's the moment of truth is everybody's fingers off the trigger, everybody's pointing in the safe direction. They have to slate, and you never want to freak out the old camera trainees. And the worst thing you can do is be aiming at the camera, and then a slate comes across it. It makes them nervous, right? So what I do is I always tell my coworkers, and I'll tell the cast, I said, look, just point the weapon down, let them slate. When they clear, you bring it up. It only takes a nanosecond for them on the focus puller to refocus on either the weapon or the person behind the weapon. And I still do that today, 30 years later. I said, look, you don't need to point it in the shot right now. Just let them slate, get away, because it makes people nervous, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the last thing I want is I want people to feel comfortable, but always attentive at the same time,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so I'm always there. I'm right in there. I'm very verbal when it comes to stuff like that. If somebody goes where they're not supposed to be, I'll yell cut. And I've done it in the past, and I've upset some people because they don't understand what's going on until I explain it. I said, look, safety's number one. I override anybody on set. And if I yell cut, there's obviously a reason for it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes, yeah, a camera shifted, and I noticed it last second. I said, wait a minute, this is going to affect this person, who's going to affect this person that I just lined up on. And I had to be very communicative with the camera department. I said, look, if you're going to change something, I need to know, because when the ball's rolling, sometimes you can't stop the machine because it's so loud that you could sit there and hit a horn all day and no one's going to hear it over the gunfire. And then a lot of times they would, I'd have a director that was quite new. Sometimes we'd get these very new directors, and they're not very, they're semi challenged when it comes to action. And they're like, he or she would say, well, I yelled cut. How come I said, look, it's better to just let the firearms empty out and then cut at that point, because they can't hear you unless we have some type of a lighting cue. If it's a night sequence where everybody can see a light,
Mm-hmm.
or a laser of some sort that's off camera. But a lot of times it's really, really hard to hear, especially using full loads.
Mm-hmm.
So I wouldn't go hot on anything until I'm absolutely 110% sure that everything is very good. I remember firing a 50 caliber inside a soundstage. I think it was stage 2 at Bridge Studios, and we had a 50 cal that's shooting at I think it's at one of the Jaffa aircraft, but it had to fire on an angle. The stunt performer had to cock it and empty out
Yes.
125 round belt or 150 round belt. But then the camera had to counter it. So they go like this and then they aim and then they go back and forth across it.
I think that's the
So
pilot to universe. I think that's air when the
yes,
death
yeah,
gliders are coming in hot on the planet.
that's right.
Yeah.
And actually Kenny Gibbs there's a
Yeah.
video out there somewhere that you can see of how I explain it. And so they were all worried about Lexan and concussive
Mm-hmm.
effect and how we would shake the camera. So what I did is we had excellent key grips on the show. They're some of the best in town. And we took these 8-foot long pieces of Lexan. Now, Lexan is a polycarbonate that's 1/2 inch to 3/4 inch thick. It's basically bullet resistant. It's really tough stuff. The US military uses it inside their vehicles to protect from shrapnel, from
Wow.
rocket propelled grenades and so on. And I said, look, I want to keep cameras safe. They're going to be down low looking up at the shooter on the 50 cal. As the 50's shooting this way, they're going to be coming across like this, and then we're going to be going back and forth, right? Until he empties out the entire weapon. I said, the best way to do that is not to go flat with the Lexan, because now you're just getting a full concussive effect. I says, let's angle the Lexan over the camera. So camera's here, and we angle it over him. And then we had Lexan underneath, and they had a clear lane
Mm-hmm.
to go back and forth. And so the shock wave was actually deflected off the Lexan. And they said it was like night and day. It was
Wow.
something that I had to work with the grips, but I'm working because I know firearms so well. I had to work with okay, well, this is an incredible shockwave. This is a weapon you're not really supposed to shoot indoors. And we were shooting it indoors with full loads with a 6-foot flame coming out of the front of it. So we ended up setting that shot up. I think we did probably close to 10 takes with different lenses, and they wanted different angles and
Mm-hmm.
stuff like that. It worked out great on
It's a
Atlantis.
it's a great sequence in
Yeah.
universe with defending the Icarus base. I mean, it's just wild. The production value on universe was just amazing. I'm not surprised you did 10 takes for that sequence.
Well, it was, it's funny because after the first take, more people just started leaving the building because I said, look, the concussion of this is going to make you feel uncomfortable. You could wear all the ear protection in the world.
It's going
Your
through your
ears,
body.
it's going through your body. It's like a jackhammer right
Yeah.
next to you. And I said, if you feel uncomfortable, I highly suggest that when we go hot, just leave. The stage door was literally about 35 feet away, and they had exits on both sides.
Mm-hmm.
It was a very small stage we were doing that in. And we called it one of the baby stages. And they ended up, after the first take, all of a sudden there's less crew and less crew and less. Then all of a sudden it's just the ADs.
We're really not needed for this. I think we've had enough fun. You know,
Well, it ended up
you have a good
just
time.
being
We'll
the
come
camera.
back.
Yeah, no, it was a lot of fun. It went well, and I'm glad that I got to be a big influence, and that's how I became so assimilated with the crew, because a lot of different departments had to trust me, and I had to trust them, right? So there was this very good working and friendly relationship that we had. There was no arguments whatsoever. It was after, I would say, season 2 of SG1, it was like a well-oiled machine, and then it was simple. Then Atlantis came along. We had a new crew. Sometimes we had a crossover crew because we had a prop master that was doing both shows until another one came in. So it was almost like showing people again, right? Learning or showing them what you've learned from this production that you have to send over here. And you have people that have never done action movies and action TV series. So now I'm constantly teaching. At the same time, I'm always learning too, because I'm learning new technology and cameras. And it only matters what this sees, because anything outside of that lens,
It's gonna get
it
missed.
doesn't matter. And sometimes you have to, as a technical advisor, you got to, what they say, how you say, bite the bullet. You have to basically allow a certain amount of flexibility and cheat So instead of having the guys all spread out so they don't all get shot with one burst of a machine gun, we have to cheat them inwards so the camera sees all of them instead of only three of them, right? So there's always that happy balance that you had to find and stuff like that. So any technical advisor around the world will tell you it can be a challenge because you want it done right, but then you also have to think, what does the camera see? Because everything else is irrelevant. If it's not in frame, it's not needed, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're not going to capture it. I have the last photo here of you standing next to. It looks like a 50 cal to me. It looks like the same size as what was in the gate room. It's on a tripod, and it's as tall as you are. What is this?
That is a 50 cal. That's an M2 Browning heavy machine gun.
My
And
gosh!
well, they used to mount those in aircraft in World War II, right? They'd have 6 or 8
Wow.
of them in these fighter aircraft, but still used today. Obviously, updated versions of it, but still
Yeah,
used
if it
today.
ain't broke, don't fix it.
It works great. That was on season 5, episode 1. Dan Percival was a very good friend of mine. He was the showrunner and director on that episode, and that was on The Man in the High Castle.
Ah, okay.
We fired thousands and thousands of rounds because they're taking out Nazis and
Yep.
they're rebels. So it was basically a very similar sequence to like the boot in the ground and then the big battle sequence.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of did that in reverse. We went from left to right and it started on feet going through mud and then coming up and seeing this whole battle sequence. Our lead actor jumping over, or one of our leads jumping over a sand pit and engaging with the Nazis. Different show, but same kind of scenario, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have to be extremely safe. I had a special vehicle just to carry the ammunition that day because ammunition is quite heavy. But
Yeah.
yeah, we fired a lot of rounds that day, and through SG1 Atlantis Universe, especially SG1 and Atlantis, we fired tens of thousands of rounds. I can't give you a ballpark number, but I know it's in the hundreds of thousands through all those seasons because all of a sudden a sequence would either grow or diminish, whether it's an action scene, right?
Mm-hmm.
It all depended on the budget because budgets are budgets and episodic budgets are episodic budget. They try to stay true to it. So if they take away from one production or one department and give it to another, then other departments can suffer from it. So you had to be on the ball, right? So every time I did a breakdown of a script for SG1 Atlantis and sometimes Universe, I would say, look, I think we're going to use about 14,000 rounds in this. And I said, give or take
My
1,000.
gosh.
Or the next one would be like, this is an easy one. This is a couple thousand rounds. This is not anything difficult. It's only like 2 different sequences and 8 people shooting or whatever. But you also had to implement training ammunition. So blank ammunition, you used it also for training purposes. If you had an SG member that was not trained and had to do a big battle sequence, guess what? You're taking those people and you're having to spend a whole day with them doing first dry training, getting used to the firearm itself, learning the stoppages and immediate actions and the reloading and stuff like that, and how to hold it right, how to conduct yourself safely with it, and then implement blanks with it. So you had to always think about that also. You had to uh, I did the A-Team movie. We went through 220,000 rounds of blanks, and 60 of that was just for training. So obviously a big budget feature. I had to train the 4 lead cast, and we went through lots of ammunition, and they wanted it throughout the entire production, not just at the start. So, and that's the same with SG1. Sometimes Rick or Amanda or Chris or Michael, if they have an episode coming up where they're just and then Chris Judge would sometimes have 2 P90s blowing away at the same time, or he'd have the squad automatic weapon, big M249 with a 200 round belt. He says, Rob, is there any way I can get a little refresher training? It's been a while since I fired blanks. I'm like, absolutely. I'd bring it up to the prop master bring it up to the production manager bring it up to line producer, and then you get the yay or nay. And 99.9% of the time they said yes. But if it's a time constraint, sometimes I was training them on the day. So I'd get them in the morning, do some shooting with them at a distance distance so as not to disturb the crew itself, and then just carry on with that, right? So there was many different types of scenarios you had to go through, and you had to be able to make decisions at a moment's notice, right? The minute you hesitated, they'd see right through you, right?
And on that, juxtaposed to that, is there any time in your time during any production where you've taken a person aside, or you've been in that situation where, okay, I've got to train this person, you had a few moments with them, you saw what they can do, and it's just like, no, I don't trust this person, I don't feel safe around this person? Yeah, I'm sorry. No.
That not on Stargate, not on
I wouldn't think so, but in terms of
No,
any production that you've worked on.
that's happened to me, and I obviously won't name the actor or
No.
the production, but that's happened to me probably about half a dozen times with certain actors, and some of them were A-list actors, where you would think that they would have a little bit more common sense.
They're full of shit.
Yeah, and they're just basically, well, I learned this on this show, or I learned this off this TV show. I'm like, well, that's a bad TV show, right?
You learned wrong.
You learn wrong, and so then you have to be very diplomatic, right? Because you're hired to do a job. They're going to do the sequence, so you have to find a way. And I've had times in the past where I've had an actor who was under the influence with alcohol and about to do a gunfire sequence. I said, nope, you're going to CGI this whole sequence. I'm going to give him a plastic gun, a plastic replica, and he's just going to dry fire it. And we're not firing any blanks in this. Why, Rob? Why? Let me tell you why.
Smell his breath.
I could smell the whiskey 10 feet away. Right. So you have to make that decision, because if you went along with it, then obviously mistakes happen and it could be fatal at that point. So yes, you have to be very strict. And people say, well, what if you get fired? I says, well, then I get fired. I get fired for being the safe guy. Right. But I've been in that situation, and thankfully not on Stargate or Atlantis or Universe. I've never had to deal with that. The cast was all very professional. Some were more knowledgeable than others, obviously, and some were more finicky than others. But that was the cream of my job, was to mold that character into a believable soldier, believable enough for camera that they can sell it and be extremely safe at the same time, right? It's creating that illusion, because I've been on shows where all of a sudden they say, oh, we don't have time. He's a Navy SEAL, but you got 20 minutes to train him. I'm like, that's a 2-year program to get that, those, the old badge on your chest and stuff like that. But I said, you're going to get 20 minutes of quality there, right?
So you have to be prepared to shoulder the responsibility, and sometimes that's saying no. I have to have a brief aside from my family. My dad was an emergency medical helicopter pilot years after he flew Hueys, and his chief responsibility was was the safety of the passengers, and his crew and his patients. And he would look at the weather sometimes after getting a call and would say, no, we can't go out there and fly. And so it would go to another company. And I think there was more than one occasion they lost the helicopter, they lost the crew and the patient. And you have to make the best call for your team. And sometimes that means saying, for the greater good, even though there's someone out there who needs your help, or you need to be help with a task, I can't do this. Not under these conditions. I won't put my team in jeopardy.
No, that makes 100% sense. It's you don't want to jeopardize your team when you don't have to, right? So
exactly. We've kind of covered this, but General Maximus asks, maybe you can fill in some details if that applies in this specific question. In your first interview, you talked about how dedicated time would be set aside with the main cast to train them on the weapons they were using. How does that scale on set to large battle scenes like in Heroes, where multiple SG teams or base personnel are involved and 10 plus people are in a scene spraying bullets everywhere? How do you manage the safety aspect of the shoot on the day with so many actors being involved? Does like Alpha, Bravo, Delta, do they all have like captains who were responsible for cascading information? How does that work?
Well, the ratio that we use up here is 7 to 1. So 7 shooters for every armor, right?
Okay.
So I'd bring in multiple armors, and those multiple armors would be responsible for their group. Whether they're a trained background or not, years ago, while I was doing Stargate, I also owned a talent agency at the time. It no longer exists. It was called DEFCON 5 Talent, and it was dealt with trained background in SWAT and military. And I remember we interviewed 400 people. We hired 36 out of that. And I would say 10 were women, the rest were men. And we handpicked them, my old business partner and I, who's no longer in the industry. But we handpicked them, we trained them. These people got a lot of work. They were those special ability extras that were always called because they were excellent with firearms. And we trained them from the ground up. You know, a lot of them never fired a weapon before, especially on a film set.
Mm.
And that was at a certain level. But then if you had the budget, you would also train the background in it if you had the time. Now, sometimes there was more background than we had firearms. So you had to give them replicas and they had to mime it. And then they ended up CGI-ing it, you know, visual effects. And those were the people in the deep background, not the ones in the foreground, right? Because sometimes we'd have like 100 soldiers and have 60 firearms, or like, well, we have to hand out the rest of the replicas and rubber guns. And then I would show them how to mime it to sell it for recoil of the firearm as if they're firing, not to the point where it's overkill, where it looks stupid.
Right. You're this
So
big on the screen,
somewhere,
but don't be stupid.
yeah, yeah. Well, we wouldn't say stupid. We would,
No, no.
just don't be less smart, right? So, but in today's age, you have to say that.
Of course.
But yeah, it could be challenging at times. And then there was I had to deal with some actors, even on Stargate, some people that were brought in as day calls or co-stars that just came in for an episode that were extremely afraid of firearms, and their character is part of an SG team. So then it gets to the point where you can't force somebody to fire a firearm. If they don't want to fire it, they're not going to fire it. You have options. You can have them CG it. You go with a airsoft gas gun where the slide moves. You have all these options if they don't want to actually fire blanks. Most actors did, 95%. There was that 5% that felt a little uncomfortable and this and that. I said, okay, well, I'm not going to force you because I don't want to force you to do something that you're not comfortable with.
You did come on a military show. I mean, you know, but yeah.
Well, yeah, but sometimes they were casted for different reasons too. Right?
That's fair.
You know, it wasn't strictly because they looked the part, but because they had a grasp of a certain dialogue that was really good, or they had a
fair point. Yeah.
So then they're not experts in the military, right? So you had to give them options, and then you had to communicate with production on that. And that's where I was kind of like the middleman with that all the time. I would say, look, this person does not want to fire firearms. I says, our option is CGI. I know it's an increase in the visual effects budget. Back then, it wasn't cheaper as it is now. It was far more expensive, especially in the late 90s and early 2000s. And they would say, okay, Rob, you know what? We'll add it to the budget, right? It'll be in post-production. Post-production always has a separate budget anyways. They seem to have an unlimited budget sometimes on certain shows, but it's not true. They do have a budget. And so then they would say, is that your professional opinion? I said, yeah, absolutely. I says, and then there'd be some actors that were just seamless. I would show them the weapon. I worked with Matt Damon several times, and it was seamless. I'd have a whole day with them, and after 3 hours, I'd put the firearms back into our shop, and we'd play pool the rest of the day because I said, you got it. I can't teach you anymore. I says you're handling the firearm as good as I can, and on camera, and it was more of a refresher training for him and stuff like that. They've allotted the time and stuff like that, but you know, and then sometimes actors would be the opposite. I would say, I need another day with this person, or I need another 2 days with this group, or something like that, right? So you had to read your actor, and you had to read your stunt performer and background. You had to make sure that they were confident with the weapon, but not less smart, and that they were Also very safe with it. Safety being priority, right? That's always paramount in any production, whether it's television or feature film. So you always had to be on the ball all the time.
Wow. You ready to get esoteric on something?
Sure.
45 Ely said 455 ELEY. I know the Carter Special Micro 16 carbine was used in season 7 because of issues getting P95.7 by 28 millimeter blanks. So that translates for you. Okay, good. Was
Yeah.
there ever an in-universe explanation and how you went about deciding how to configure it? Okay, can you please translate for us?
Yes. So the weapon she had was obviously not a P90. I'll explain about the P90 ammunition. So the brass itself came from Belgium. Then it was shipped to the US where we got our blanks made. And then it's shipped from the US to us. Well, if they don't have the brass from the actual company, Fabrique Nationale, that makes the P90 itself, the brass is controlled because it's one of a kind caliber, right? They were using the brass more for war efforts, for real life stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And they weren't sending it anymore. So then eventually we would run out. So then we had to give options. And we had lots of the 223 caliber or 5.56 millimeter brass. There was millions of rounds in the world of that because it's been around much longer. So we had to make a decision with production. And what I did is I brought a series of different firearms for a show and tell for the director and the producers that had to make this vital decision. And we're talking like 2 episodes away. It's not like the next day, right?
Okay.
So they would know this, and because we'd warned them and said, look, we're running out of P90 ammo, like we're down to like 10,000 rounds. And we'd blow that in a day sometimes, right? So they would say, okay, well, can you bring us some options? Now, the key to bringing options is if you bring too many, it's too much eye candy. But if you bring too little, I always found the perfect number was like 3 or 4. And then you also have to remember the character itself. Is it going to be too heavy for the character?
Mm-hmm.
Is it going to be make the character look stupid, or is it going to be too small in that character? Like if you saw like Chris Judge is a bigger person than Amanda Tapping was, so you're not going to give Chris a little Derringer pistol from the Western days
Noisy
and
crickets.
Amanda a Barrett 50 cal sniper rifle to sling over.
Yeah.
It just makes sense. So then that's why we had to make that decision. And then I brought the show and tell. We had all the weapons. I had them in different configurations, different models and makes. They picked that one, and we ended up using it quite a bit because and waiting until we had access to brass. And then I think in one of the episodes of now, correct me if I'm wrong, she does the transition back to the P90.
I'm trying to remember the episode in season 7 that you guys are referring to. There was an episode where she was being pursued by a super soldier. That was Death Knell.
Yes.
Maybe that was it. I'm not familiar with this specific episode. If
Yeah,
455 Ely is still in there, I'd like to know because I'm like, there were. I mean, you had heroes. That's it. I'm sure. Yeah, I don't recall the Carter special specifically. So
it may have been just reintroduced for the next episode
yeah.
she just had.
Okay.
Right. So, but I know that, and I know this because of all the forecasts have told me they love the P90. It was obviously
Right.
a favorite for them. It was a fan favorite. It was a very unique weapon. It still is to this day, and it's quite old in firearm terms, but still extremely reliable and is easy to mold for
Mm-hmm.
rubbers, lots of replicas, and it didn't have a lot of sharp edges like today's modern assault rifles do, where they have longer barrels, edgy stuff. Magazines are edgy. This was a very smooth, film friendly
Mm-hmm.
firearm when it comes to that. And the cast loved it. And like you said, if it isn't broke, don't fix it, right?
Right.
But
Exactly. And
our hands
they
were
get to do
tied.
this. So
Yeah, Rick always did the old lean over. He always, yeah, and sometimes Michael Shanks would do the same thing if he had a P90. But he fired more. I think Michael fired more his pistol than anything
yeah.
because he always carried the M9 Beretta. They all did, but he tended to use that more than anything because he always had some type of an artifact or some serious technology in one hand and didn't want to do the P90 with one hand like Chris Judge would do effortlessly.
He's so big. Chris is so
So,
big, and Daniel is the
big
archaeologist,
guy.
so it makes
Yeah.
sense that Yeah, that they would
Yeah.
have certain weapons to suit their needs. But like that episode at the premiere of season 5 in Enemies, if he needed to fire that thing and be in coordination with the others as they're going trying to exit that ship, they can do it and look good doing it. So
And you remember Tilk, he could never smile. It had to be like this.
yeah, exactly.
As he's shooting, right? And then after the take, he would give me both P90s and he'd start laughing. He goes, damn, I love shooting those things, right? And I said, don't smile, don't smile.
Nope.
You're not having fun. You're an alien that's killing bad guys. But they all loved it, right?
Oh man.
I would say the people that fired it the most were probably Rick and Amanda, especially
Mm-hmm.
Amanda. She got very skilled with that weapon. And sometimes Rick and Amanda would have competition to see who could do reloads the fastest. Just, while we're setting up for a shot, I'd have clear and safe magazines and I would time them and stuff like that. So we had fun with it. There was a lot of times where I spent a lot of off-camera times with them. I've gone out for dinner with them. I've been to Rick's house several times for dinner when, we became this really tight sort of trustworthy family, right? And that's something rare in film. It's really, really hard to achieve that. It takes many seasons and a lot of trust. And, it's to this day, I could still say they're all very good friends of mine still,
Good
which is
people.
great.
The
Yeah.
episode was Avenger 2.0 with Felger, and they're at the DHD fixing up a problem. That's what it was.
Oh,
Thank
yes.
you, chat. I appreciate you guys. You can always rely on your fellow fans most of
Yeah.
the time.
Well, I want to add something.
Yeah.
You remember the M.A.L.P? Do you know what the M.A.L.P is?
The M.A.L.P, the Mobile Analytic Laboratory Probe?
Yes.
Yeah.
The special effects department hated that thing because it broke down a lot of times.
I'm sure it did.
And there was a one time, also I was doing stunt work. I get shot in the chest by a staff blast. I'm on the melt firing the 50 cal in a very sandy environment. Rick takes over.
That was
And
you? That was you in Forever and a Day? As
that's
the
right.
Jaffa are coming over the hill?
Well, they had to try and hide my face because, like, didn't we see you get killed as a different character like an episode ago or a few episodes? So what happened was I showed Rick. I said, if you have a misfire on the 50 cal, you just reach underneath the cocking handle underhand and cock it, and it gets rid of the bad round and chambers the next good round. And the problem was when I got shot off the back, I was on a cable. So I get a staff blast, and as we know, it ignites. It's fire, right, coming through you. And I get yanked off. But when I hit the ground, one of my earplugs fell out.
Oh, no.
And I'm dead. I'm not supposed to move because I'm in the shot. I'm dead at that point. And the 50 cal's going, and it's literally about 7 feet from me, 6, 7 feet away. And all I just hear is my left ear going. It's like I went to a Motley Crue concert and I was 3 feet away from the speaker. And so at the end of the take, I'm like, my left ear was just ringing. And, there was obviously a little bit of damage there. And what happened was the earplug wasn't in deep enough and it just popped out. I hit the ground so hard and my helmet hit back that it popped the earplug out. So that wasn't so much fun, but
I just showed the shot, and you look awesome.
I only told that to Dan Shea. I didn't tell anybody else. If I go like this, it's because I can't hear in this ear. And he's like, okay, no problem, Rob. He says, we'll make sure. He says, I'm glad we got that shot. He said, you don't have to yell, Rob. I'm like, sorry.
Doing the best I can. That's funny. Jeremy Heiner, Rob, how many of the sounds of the firearms do you think were faked or applied in post? He says, I noticed that many had the same sound regardless of what was being fired. Oh.
You know what? When we were indoors, it's all dubbed.
Okay.
It's all different firearms because there was too much reverberation for the sound department off the walls and this and that. When we were exterior, I would say they kept 90% of the actual sound of the weapon, because a lot of times the blanks can be louder than the actual live round, like a ball ammunition, because where the blank is and the ball ammunition actually takes space inside the casing, where a blank, you could fill it right to the top almost. So you can actually put, in theory, more powder inside of a blank than you can in a live round. And that's not for all calibers, but certain calibers, yes. So now you're dealing with a bigger bang.
Mm-hmm.
So when we were exterior scenes, whether it was day or night, whether we're filming residential or using quarter loads or full loads, a lot of times they just use the actual sound. And they would have certain microphones that were set in different areas, so they would get a nice echo and
Mm-hmm.
stuff like that. And then they would mix it in post and stuff like that. But I know that most of it indoors was all just what we did record the sound of certain weapons, and then they just kept that as their catalog.
I see. So they just they already had those on file. Okay, got it.
That's right.
Okay,
Yeah.
that makes a lot of sense. Jeremy also wanted to know: did you ever have to inform the authorities that you're shooting on a set or on location so that they don't think there's a shooting happening? I mean, what's
Yeah.
the procedure there, especially when you're going into neighborhoods?
Well, that's usually up to 100% of the time it's up to the location department.
Okay.
So your location manager with location scouts will scout that area well in advance. We're talking sometimes a month or 2 months in advance, and say, look, we know there's residential there. It's a daytime scene. We're doing massive amounts of gunfire. It's going to sound like World War III out there. So they basically go house to house and tell people this. And then if people aren't comfortable with it, they get them a hotel room somewhere
Mm-hmm.
just for the night if it bothered them, right? Especially if we're doing a late night shot or
Yeah,
something
people
like that.
have jobs.
They have jobs. They don't want to be woken up by
Right.
like a reverb of 20 guns firing blanks, right? So, but that's exactly up to location department. And communication obviously with the armor too, saying in advance, say, look, we're going to be using these loads in this area on these dates. Can you let the people in that area know this? And they had excellent location managers, and several of them, because they had to overlap episodes, right?
Mm-hmm.
Some would be on set, some would be scouting, some would be in production meetings. So it was quite a big machine to make everything work. But yeah, that was 100% up to the location department.
Dan Ben wants to know about the few times that rocket launchers were fired.
Oh, yeah, that's all CGI. So
Oh, never real
we're
rocket
not
launchers.
actually,
Okay,
no,
you
no,
can't
we
you
never
can't simulate a rocket launcher.
no,
Okay,
we never use live ammunition on
okay.
set. I've been doing this never used live ammo ever, and never will. So what they do with like an RPG or a Stinger missile system, special effects would put in a little almost like a powdery exploding substance in the back end of the rocket launcher. And when they hit a switch, it would actually blow out and give a puff of smoke.
So you have something visualized.
You have something that visual effects can tail off of, and then the rest would be all CG, like they did with the Jaffa aircraft. Those are all CG, so that as long as he was pointed in the generally the right direction and not the opposite direction, they could generalize and say, okay, well, it's going to come over those trees, it's going to straight down here with the plasma bombs, and then it's going to curve off to the left or whatever. So then they would have to basically, okay, and I would be there with an RPG with a fake warhead, just a piece of plastic,
Mm-hmm.
or sometimes no warhead that they would CGI. And effects, I would go to special effects, and they put in this little, it was like a little Ziploc bag almost, painted black so you didn't see it. And then it would have a hard wire that went all the way down the weapon. We'd tape it along, and I would work with special effects on this because we didn't want to see the wire. And because the more you got to paint out with visual effects, the more expensive,
Of
obviously.
course.
So then it would go all the way down to the shooter, through his arm, through down his chest, down his leg pant, out his pants, and then bury it in the dirt or the sand. And then there would be a guy with it there, basically on an ignition. And he would sit there and just wait until the perfect angle, hit it, it'd blow the smoke. And then other times, sometimes it was self-detonate too, right? So the actual shooter would have hit the right mark, hit the button on it, as I did when I was squibbed. So you had different variations. The hard wire was always more reliable because, as we know, when you self-detonate on a battery, it can sometimes have the wrong signal, or it doesn't connect properly, or the wire's cut or something like that. And radio signals, well, everybody has a radio on set, so they turn off your radio. Well, if you turn off the radio, then you don't hear what's going on, right?
Mm-hmm.
So It's kind of a double-edged sword. So
And
most of the times they were all hardlined.
and a lot of the devices, I sold a lot of the Stargate stuff through PropWorks for a couple of years, where had little radio controllers to change the lighting effects on the device. So you had stuff running everywhere, all kinds of juice flowing through everything. So
The props department at the time was one of the biggest in the, and they had their own. Well, they sourced out a lot of the prop builds to different companies, but it got to the point where Stargate, SG-1, Atlantis were sharing the same prop makers in-house.
mm-hmm.
They couldn't build the stuff quick enough. Like it
Mm-hmm.
was like, oh, it looked great on camera, but it's shattered. It's in 20 pieces now. So we need 4 more. And they're like, oh, but we only budget for 2. And said, no, no, no. So it was always give and take, right? So you had to, it was massive. Like I was only a small part of it. I was always hired by the prop master first and foremost. And, I still am very good friends with the former prop masters and stuff, but I was only one little piece of the pie. There was so much more than what you see here, right? So,
Absolutely. Dwayne Haskett, did you work on Andromeda? And Chantel Leo, do you have any memories from Sanctuary?
oh yeah, yeah. I've done some episodes of Andromeda. It wasn't so much of a battle sequences
Mm.
on that. It's a lot of CG. Sorry, what was the second production you said?
Sanctuary.
Sanctuary. Yes,
Yeah,
lots.
Amanda Martin Wood.
Lots of yeah. Amanda directed a lot. Martin directed, and they were producers on the show. And it was a lower budget, and a lot of it was CG. And you had some pretty unique characters on it, including Bigfoot and all that.
It's
But
true. That's
I
right.
did, yeah, I did. Sanctuary wasn't as busy as SG-1 Atlantis were in their heyday,
Mm.
but nonetheless, they're friends of mine, and I would, if I had a choice, whether it was one production or another, I would take them. Like I said, I wasn't full time on Sanctuary
Mm.
as much as I was like on SG-1 or Atlantis, but I still had a blast, and it was like almost like a little family reunion every time I saw them. So there was already that trust, that friendship there. It made it so simple on set, and then you had to deal obviously with sometimes with new crew and stuff. They didn't know you from a hole in the ground.
Mm.
You can have the best resume in the world, but if it's the first time they meet you, they don't know who you are, right?
Of
And
course.
unless they check out IMDb or
Right.
IMDb, but even then, do they really know you, right? So
Well, that's the thing. Yeah, your resume says only to a point. And Sanctuary, there would have been no Sanctuary without Stargate. So that
right.
that came out of a lot of that shared DNA, and you were automatically going to be an extension of that if you came on and had fun with them. So
Absolutely, yeah.
that's wild. Um, so are you working right now? Are you what's going on through these strikes? So
Uh,
how has that changed things
everybody,
for you?
it's been the last 3 months have been very challenging.
Okay.
I'm working on these lots of, not lots, but these non-union productions,
Okay.
where some of them are Canadian productions that are not through SAG, they're through UBCP ACTRA. Very low budget. I'm working on one right now where they actually want me a little bit of a day a week type thing, and I'm dealing with the lead actress, and she has no firearms experience. Supposed to be an ex-detective and then becomes a shooter and stuff, so I'm spending more and more time with her. It's always a budget constraint because it's an extremely low budget, so you have to work with it. I still work on them because I want to stay sharp, because
Mm-hmm.
if you sit around and just stare at the phone all day, it's nothing's going to help there. So you got to stay active. My ear is obviously to the grindstone like everyone else. We're just waiting to see what's happening with the Writers Guild and with the Screen Actors Guild, and hopefully they can come to some type of an agreement in the next you know 3 to 6 weeks if possible. There's some big productions, including I can't say what it is, but it's in town here, that basically went dormant until possibly next spring, which is unheard of because now you're going to lose a lot of that A-list crew. And I was slated to work on it also. So now it's basically everybody's laid off, and they've already spent tens of millions of dollars just sitting there. The sound stages.
There have to be the rent has to be paid.
It has to be paid, and these stages are not cheap. I was at the Bridge Studios last week. I could count how many vehicles were there on one hand. That's unheard of. I've never seen that. I've never seen it this quiet. And that's just in Vancouver. I can't imagine Los Angeles, Atlanta, New York City. London is slow. I have connections in London, in Rome. I have connections in Madrid, where I've worked with several times. They're slow there too. The SAG is affecting the entire planet at this point.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
It's it spirals into a lot, hundreds of different industries. It's not
Yeah.
just,
Oh,
uh,
rental houses also, right? It affects
it's
them
all of
huge.
it, you know.
Catering companies, all that. Yeah, it's I'm hoping that there is some type of an agreement. It's I do stunt work still, not as much as I used to, but I'm part of UBCB ACTRA. I'm also, if I'm not working as an armorer, I'm also with IATSE 891
Yeah.
because I do props
Yep.
on the side. It's very rare, but I know every prop master in this city. They've hired me as an armorer, so it's a very easy integration to do props with them. And yeah, it's just it's unfortunate because I have a lot of friends that I haven't seen in a long time. And if it goes on too long, people are going to start they're going to start losing a lot of quality technicians that are just going to find new
They're
careers
going to move
somehow,
on. They've got to
or
feed
they'll
their
retire.
families, or they'll
Yeah.
retire. Yeah, that's true too. So,
Yeah.
Rob, what does Stargate mean to you? After all of this, years of working on it, you've practically had your pick of all kinds of different projects. You've worked with the best. What does Stargate mean to you in the scheme of that?
It was a happy place. I could say that, honestly, it was a happy place. There's obviously every production has their challenges, but I was excited to go on set. I was excited to do an episode. I was excited at the end of the day because I knew everybody went home safe. So to me, it was a very special place in my heart, and it meant a lot,
Mm.
and it still does.
I appreciate you coming on to talk again. I appreciate you sharing all these stories. The fact that I can tee you up on something and it's like winding up and letting you go. You remember that scene? Martin Wood is good at that. A couple of the others, but that's whew. Thank you for sharing these memories.
Well, the pleasure's all mine, David.
I,
Absolutely.
I appreciate you, sir, and I will be in touch with you soon.
All right, let's keep those chevrons engaging.
Absolutely. You take care of yourself, sir.
Take care.
Be well.
Thank you very much.
Rob Fournier, Armorer, Stargate SG-1, Atlantis and Universe. What a guy. I love having him on. The enthusiasm from so many of these people who worked on these productions for years continues to amaze me, even after 20 years later for some of them. And so it means so much to me to have him on and to have these people continue to be a part of the process. RJR wanted to know, has David done any videos about his time working on SG-1? I bet it would be fascinating. I didn't work on Stargate. I was a reporter. So I was there filming, not filming video, but recording audio content for Gate World for the most part. So I was on set from, what would this have been? My first year was season 9 of SG-1 and season 2 of Atlantis. So I visited the set at least once a year from 2003 until the end of the series. And so my content is primarily Gate World interviews. So if you go over to gateworld.net and click on the interviews link, most of those are mine. Some of them were with Darren on set. Most of them were over the phone. A couple of them were text, but that was mostly what I did. I was a reporter. I never worked directly for Stargate Productions. I have since worked directly for MGM on a couple of different projects, but that's a long story. I wanted to share something. We had on Brian Harris a few weeks ago, and he has created custom Stargate props, various different metals. He's a die maker, and so he's manufactured some of these beautiful pieces. And I'm going to recommend that you guys go and check it out. It's a 15-20 minute interview from Vancouver from last year, and just go and look up. It's a gold replicator block is the image of the thumbnail, and custom Stargate items from Brian Harris. He sent me this, and I am overwhelmed by his kindness and his generosity and his freaking this thing is so heavy. His craftsmanship is just extraordinary. This is something that I will treasure for a very long time. It is let me read the what's on the back here. For my fellow Stargate enthusiast David, this is my original CNC machined Stargate ring. This was made before I built the reverse side on my CAD program. I machined the gate in 2014, produced from 1/4-inch engraver's brass, after which I added the patina. I haven't made any other ring like this one. It's something I'm very proud of. The background art has been laser engraved with a gold pattern for the borders, plus the SG-1 insignia, all supported by the main cast photo. Sincerely yours, Brian Harris. I told him at the time over email when I told him that I was going to be sharing this on this episode that I had no words. I still don't. And I can't wait to make it a part of the set here. So I'm going to have to figure out how to slide it in slanted so that everyone can get to see it every episode, because it's a beautiful gift. And thank you so much, Brian, for this wonderful piece and for sharing your remarkable talent with all of the Stargate community on Dial the Gate. I appreciate you. We have coming up tomorrow 3 shows. So one is pre-recorded. It's going to be Colin Bowman of Hollywood Collectibles. So Hollywood Collectibles is beginning to produce Stargate-related merchandise. There's one piece available right now. You can visit them at Hollywood Collectibles.com, and there will be a link in the description of that episode as well. And we're going to have him on to discuss the merchandise that his company is going to be creating for the Stargate franchise. They've got several pieces in development. Followed by Bill Nicolai, Vern Alberts in Stargate SG-1. He was one of the technicians, and he was also Rick's photo double. So we have a lot of photos to share from his time on SG-1, and a couple from Atlantis as well. And then Eric Avari is joining us tomorrow at 12 noon Pacific time to discuss more memories from Stargate. And really, I love Eric as a person. We had him on the start of the season for GateCon, but I haven't actually sat down with him in front of him like we normally do for this show. The first episode was at a convention, so this is really going to give you an opportunity to ask him questions. So he's at 12 noon Pacific time tomorrow. Bill is at 11 a.m. Pacific time, and Colin Bowman of Hollywood Collectibles is at 10 a.m. So 3 shows tomorrow, all starting 1 hour after the other. And that's what we've got going on there. I really hope you enjoyed this episode with Rob. I learned a lot. There's so many things that you just assume are practical on set, like the rocket launcher. You know, there's something. They just fire off this. No, it's all CG. It's like, no, there are no real rounds. Okay, understood. I did not realize. I apologize. Yeah, you notice he had to clarify a couple of times. There were no real rounds on the show. So now I understand what is real and what isn't in some of these cases, because it looks so photorealistic. You just assume that it's what it is. So that's what we've got. My thanks to my production team for continuing to support me while I produce this content. Linda, Gate, Gabber, Fury. My moderators, Tracy, Jeremy, Anthony, Summer, Reese, thank you for continuing to support me. My web developer, Frederick Marcoux, he keeps dialthegate.com up to date and continuing to run. And I can't do the show without any of you. My thanks again to Rob Fournier for bringing so much more information and color and characters to so many of these stories that we know and love. My name is David Reed for Dial the Gate, and I will see you on the other side.